uh, just wait for the last couple of weeks to this workshop to discuss constitutional matters, which sounds very grand. And welcome to those who are online. Jane, are you going to monitor for questions, or do I sort of start it?
Yeah, I should.
Actually, I'll dial in as well. We've had agenda. I think timing-wise, we're going to truncate a couple of the items so that Catherine will follow on with some great discussions or Q&A or whatever. And I think for just the fact, there was some of the things we're going to be discussing today were about setting up whether we set up a governance committee or whether that sits with full council. And what I indicated was, I think as councillors we should probably have a chance to discuss that amongst ourselves to discuss that. So I think those decisions are being put to one side for the moment. But it's we've got key decisions that have been rightly flagged up for us to run through. So let's see how we go. I'm going to hand over to Matt.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Good to be here. We do have a bit of a tight schedule because I'm trying to create some space for Catherine. So I will just work through the presentation. If matters come up which are directly relating to the Constitution or what we're trying to achieve today, I'll just run a bit of a tag sheet. We do have some other workshops scheduled, so we can revisit Wednesday.
Sorry.
I can come back with anything later if required. So just to give you a bit of a refresh on where we were at with the program. So we've got some key phases in place now. I've been here for 8 weeks and we have had an opportunity to have a look at the deliverables that were laid out in the Water Services Delivery Plan and put some structure around the next kind of 12 months. So I've categorised those as planning, execution, in progress and readiness. So ideally we will be ready to test many of our systems, processes and activities that have transferred or ready to transfer across in around March. The governance roadmap, so the key matters that you will all be involved in are laid out as June, September, December, March. So the key ones, obviously, the board appointment, and we're currently through the process with the chair, and then the board, the collateral's gone out for the remaining directors, so that's active and live. The Constitution, which is one of the reasons, or the reason we're here today, is to try to bottom out some of those key matters. Legal incorporation, the goal for incorporation is 30 June this year, and then we will start working on the draft statement of expectations. Alongside that, we'll have our board in place, so we'll start to do some combined work with the board. Then we have our milestones around the water services strategy. So the draft will come through to you in December, and some of the key policies that you'll need to have a view on and be across. Then we have new governance framework in place for both the CCO and council towards March, and hopefully we'll have be ready for our transfer agreement to be tabled in front of you. Implementation plan changes. So the Water Services Delivery Plan that was signed off last year by DIA outlined some key things that we were going to achieve up to February of this year. For various reasons, the timing on some of these things has moved, and the largest component of that is the elections, with local government elections, changes with elected members and so forth, and so that has impacted a number of these programs around New Zealand. So all intents and purposes, by now we would have had a board in place, maybe incorporated and maybe had a CE. That's all moved out by probably sort of 3 to 4 months, which has no impact on the overall program. on the right-hand table here, I'm kind of outlining where the movement is. So by June, we expect to be incorporated, have a full board in place, have our constitution, and I am assuming that the board will want to be starting to think about the CE appointment at that point. DIA have made it pretty clear that they will be monitoring 3 aspects of the water services delivery plan, and I've spoken to them about this recently, and they have still expressed interest. And one is any significant departures around capital expenditure. So early on, they did indicate, they accepted the plan, but they did indicate that they would be wanting us to monitor what that looks like as we start moving into the CCO, because of the quantum of numbers, and also there's quite a compressed 10 years worth of work is quite a lot for the market to achieve. So I'll be reporting back to them in April. That is the first quarterly report to the end of April. It's an operational report.
So when it says monitor, is that us as a council monitor it, or DIA is going to monitor it?
It's both. So they have recommended we monitor it,
but we report it to them.
Yeah, in their report they've asked for 3 particular things.
Yep.
So I report to them in the end of April, and I have given them an undertaking that they will have a revised implementation plan which will reflect what we originally said and how we intend to stand up by 30 June next year. And all of that is appropriate and acceptable from their perspective, obviously depending on any departures.
On that, given everything that's happening at the moment, has there been any discussions around flexibility in that space? Because there's monitoring and that's fine, but what will they be taking into account when they're monitoring and deciding whether to take any action based on the monitoring? Because presumably the monitoring is for a reason.
Yeah, so the things that they are looking at is the pricing strategy, how we're going to go about implementing that, and how that lines up with the borrowing also. So I think the plan was 1.47 billion over 10 years. They accepted that. I suppose it depends on how big the departure is. So if I'm re-tabling a plan which is 2 billion or more, then they might be saying, oh, what's that all about?
Yeah.
Of course, I won't put anything to them like that without, really good explanation, and I wouldn't do that without talking to them first. So they're not concerned, but they've indicated to all councils, if you've got big changes from your plans, we want to see what they are, and then we'll talk about what the impact of that might be.
So what would that look like in practice? Like if there were changes, how would that flow through? How would the process? Because you're working, this is new to us, but you're working at the moment.
Yes.
We're in this transition phase.
Yes.
So
and it's changes them too. It's new to them too.
Yeah.
So and I did actually put that question to them, Nikki, and they said, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. They don't have any enforcement powers, but there is that new government department that has been set up where this component of DIA will be moving into that from 1 July, and they're not sure what that looks like either. So I will dig into it if it looks like where we're currently at is quite different from the water services delivery plan. I won't explore that now just because of time.
Absolutely.
So if it looks like it's something that I need to get under the hood on.
So say, for example, your draft water strategy, if it comes out that actually we can't deliver all this capital work, and here's a reduced capital program, then obviously the quarterly reporting to DIA is going to shift. So it's just as we go through, as we as the plan, water service delivery plan comes out of date, the next document, that will be the updating.
Cool. Thank you.
How far into the future is it anticipated that quarterly reporting to DIA will continue for?
I think it's till at least June of next year, because then you've got the regulatory, the recurring compliance reports that take place. Okay, now on to the actual points, decision direction required points in relation to the constitution. Can I just check, Jane, is Mike online?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So how do I actually get to see Mike?
We, morning all. Hi, Maz. We are here if you can't see us.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. So I think you will probably meet Mike virtually in January. Mike Wakefield from Simpson Grierson and Mike's colleague Jack Appleby has been working on these matters and the background foundational documents on our behalf. So I'll just step you through all the, sorry, bear with me. The 13 or 14 different points. So some here I've actually just put a line through because I think we probably need to park those for another session, just bearing in mind what Mayor Glover's mentioned in regards to any kind of decision making forum. The ones on the left were the matters that were addressed in the January session. So when the maker starts with the first item, we have three options, is the ability to explore expansion opportunities. Mike, are you okay if I'll lead us into it and then you may want to talk to each option briefly?
Sounds really good, Maz.
Perfect. Would you like to talk to the first point?
Yep, sure thing. So I guess the starting point here is that as your council through the water service delivery plan process has decided that its preferred or its proposed delivery model will be a single council-owned CCO, if there is to be any aggregation with another council, so is there a bit of feedback coming through? Is it coming through clear enough at your end?
Yeah.
All right, great. We'll just continue. If there is any intention to expand and aggregate with another council to create a multi-council owned, now that might be the Central Otago grouping or another single council that hasn't created a CCO right now, there would need to be mandatory public consultation and another decision of the council to allow that to happen. And that's because the change would be a change to the shareholding arrangements of your existing CCO to allow another council to join. So the initial context here is that at all points there will be a council decision and council process before an expanded CCO can be established. And if that decision is made by your council and by the other council who wants to join, there would then need to be a period of negotiations to resolve what the shareholder arrangements would be and the governance arrangements of that new multi-council owned CCO. So I just thought I'd make that one clear at the outset. So then we start to talk about what options you might look to put in your consultation, and they've been set out as 1, 2, 3 here. One is that there could be express provision which allows the board to explore these expansion opportunities, noting that the final approval and process will involve the council. 2 says that the council must approve before the board can initiate any exploratory discussions. And then 3 is there's nothing specific in the constitution. It's really left for the board and for the council to determine, but knowing full well that there is a council process that needs to be worked through at some point.
So you can provide us direction on what you might like to see in the constitution in that regard.
Cool. So, and just to clarify, this is about a formal amalgamation of entities. So if there was a couple of the water services CCOs wanted to do some shared procurement or shared services, that would fall outside of what we're talking about now. That's more of an operational, just if we get clarity on that.
Yes, so this is where you are talking about potentially another shareholding council.
Cool.
I'm trying to understand what option 3 actually allows.
You'd have to amend the constitution.
So you don't
So-
have just silent on it for now.
You just don't make decisions
Yeah,
until the time it's needed.
yeah, then the board may come and say, hey, look, we want to start exploring, or we've started exploring, what do you think?
So that could be for the future council to then make that decision.
Yeah, so then you would amend your constitution and you would have to have a shareholders agreement.
Just on that very point, I'm sorry for interrupting. One observation there is there have been other examples where the constitution is silent, but the statement of expectations is used as the tool to either place some parameters around any potential exploration or amalgamation. So the council shareholder is saying, we want you to reach out to other companies, but then report back to us as shareholder if there is any potential for aggregation or growth or shared arrangements.
I think personally, I think option 2 has some benefits for the community, just in terms of being settled as knowing what's going on. If that's sitting in the constitution and we haven't had a meeting, the community is not speculating about what's going on in the background. It's just very clear that it would come to a meeting, they could have some input. And I realise there's a difference between looking matters and how far you get down the track. They could get a very long way down the track without coming to us, and then it starts to. I just don't see any disadvantage. And just if they communicate with us, everything's out in the open.
I'm happy with option 2.
Yeah, I agree with option 2.
Yeah, I think it's two.
Yes.
Yeah, my view is that option 2 at this point is the most restrictive. And at this point, we are dealing with a completely blank page. We can always amend it afterwards. We can always give them free rein afterwards. But for my purposes, right now, control is what we want to drive for, and option 2 delivers that.
Yeah.
But it also delivers a message to the board that if they want to go and explore things like that, the first thing they should come and do is talk to us first before they go down some rabbit hole that we as a whole council might not be keen on. So
It's a waste of time.
I feel like option 2 is the best one for me.
Yeah.
Agree with option 2.
Yeah, I just want to add to that conversation that I agree entirely with what Stephen said, but it's more than just the board. It's a message to the community.
Sorry, I don't know how to adjust the board.
It's not
Okay.
control. It'll be on Maz's control then.
In that, yeah, it's the other issue that I think is off the agenda for discussion today, which is about interested members. So there could be board members who have an interest in another water company, could easily happen. So that what I'm concerned about is how this looks externally, and the fact that how the shareholding in Queenstown Airport was diluted, or other expertise brought in, depending on how you look at it. That is used as a case study in legal training as how not to do it. So we want to avoid that situation. We want to make sure that the council and the community is involved in it, and option 2 is the way to do that.
Cool. Nicola's got a question.
Well, I was just thinking, wouldn't it be option 2 makes sense, because wouldn't we realise when we want to amalgamate, you know, when we have the signs earlier than the CCO anyway? You would think we'd be involved in those types of conversations before then.
Not necessarily.
I suppose there's two alternative drivers. One is either local government reform, so it will either come out of something discussion that we're having around some sort of amalgamation or whatever, or there'll be some sort of economic imperative which will come from the company itself. So I think 2 covers both eventualities.
Yeah, cool.
It sounds pretty universal.
Yeah. Just really quickly, was there a reason why you didn't want to talk about number 2? Was that a councillor political thing, or? I think that was just phrased as.
I kind of felt that sort of ties into the discussion about the decision-making forum and the potential committee.
Okay.
We can come back to it actually after.
Just to close that off though, I mean, I don't think there's any world at which we wouldn't be responsible for appointing directors. It's our primary control of the CCO. So, I mean,
Let's deal with that now.
yeah.
It's different, it's completely different.
Yeah, option two.
This is constitution stuff, the others are not.
Yeah.
Is that a yes or a no?
It's a no from me.
Number
It's a
two,
no.
option two.
Yes.
Yeah, option two. I mean, I think clearly the only mechanism for appointing directors is for council to appoint them.
Thank
Again,
you.
going back to the original Queenstown Airport Corporation Constitution, which read this in that respect.
Lovely.
That's quite right.
Key decision number 3, should interested directors be allowed to vote?
No.
If they've got a conflict. Are you talking about conflict of
Yeah.
interest?
No, it's a different test.
Okay.
Mike, can you just explain what you mean by interested?
Yeah, certainly. So there's two points to make on. Am I on mute? No, I'm not. 2 points to make here. Obviously, public perception would be better if interested directors cannot vote, but it is in certain places allowed, and the governance process is relied on to ensure that the robustness of decision making is protected. And really what I mean by that is it's the case that professional directors should be well aware of the issue of conflict, and they would stand aside if they have any interest in a decision that requires them to stand aside. So there can be an interest allowed, but only where it's an interest that all directors might have, which is similar to the construct that you're all familiar with as elected members around the table here. The other school of thought is that there is a express prohibition built into the Constitution, which says as a governance safeguard, directors are prevented from voting on matters that they have an interest in. But again, the extent to which that interest exists will be clarified and captured through the conflict of interest type policies that the board will be responsible for adopting and then administering. And that's going to achieve a very clear provision in your constitution, which ensures that you have a high degree of trust in the way that the independent directors are doing their business.
Mike, is there the ability, because obviously they'll have their conflict of interest policy, which might include a register, but I would think if we were going to allow interested directors to vote, we would need to have something in the constitution to ensure that we kept track of how regular an occurrence this was, because it might go to who we employ as directors into the future. Is there the ability in the constitution to write something in where if we agree to this, or even if we don't, that it'd be a requirement to report to us and we record.
I think another point to note there, Nikki, is that the way that the legislation has come together is that these water organisations and their boards will be subject to the same meeting requirements that you are required to adhere to under LGOIMA. And so they are required to prepare and publish agendas for their meetings, and then prepare and publish minutes, which will capture any interest that they disclose in relation to agenda items that they address. So you'll be able to see that those minutes will be public, and they'll record the interests if there are any, and that will provide the ongoing record.
Sorry, Mike, I get frustrated when I'm just asking if it's possible, and all I get is why we shouldn't do it. It just feels like we're getting steered. So I just want to know, it's one thing to have things in minutes, but we know going back to minutes is really difficult. Things aren't captured in one place. Whereas if we had a register, I just wanted to know if it's possible.
I can't see a reason why it wouldn't be possible, Nikki.
So can I just, and I think we've been presented with a binary option when actually, I think some of them be saying, well, should they be allowed to vote? Option 1, yes, subject to, subject to compliance with the organisation's conflict of interest. So it's a bit more conditional than just a yes or no, because I think that's where we're struggling.
There needs to be some mitigation.
So I don't know whether that,
because there is some decisions that directors have to make.
Yeah.
They all have an interest in. And if they all have an interest and they can't vote, then they can't make that decision.
Well, I mean,
like insurance, like indemnity, things like that. So you can, the they should be, in my view, they should be allowed to vote, but they'll also have their other conflicts where they'll say, I just can't vote on that amount because I've got a conflict.
Because it might be we've got a director that's sitting on another water services entity and the discussions about amalgamation or procurement, you know, the obvious things that I'm not sure where we would sit on, you know, because we've said we're comfortable with the directors to sit on multiple entities.
I think,
where do they then, are they conflicted out of discussion on amalgamation? I don't know.
But I think that's the point of the things are noted. We can track them. If they come back to us, we can just keep an eye on what's going on.
well, I think the point that it's not binary is the important bit, because there clearly needs to be a policy that developed around how you manage interests and stuff. But the one thing that's really clear to me is we have almost no visibility or no management of interest for the QAC directors. So, you know, I can't accept that, you know, we would automatically have oversight of these, because it's just clearly not the case at the moment. So we would need to develop a policy that, you know, is sits, you know, parallel to the Constitution and the, yeah.
This is, Mike, this is potentially problematic because the express intent of having boards for these water entities, that they will have a significant proportion of members who have an interest in water services and or other water providers or water infrastructure. Is that the potential? Otherwise, why would you raise it? Because there's already rules in place.
Well, I think this is just a common question that is asked when constitutions are being brought together. But I think where Councillor Smith took the conversation was another point I didn't quite come to, which was there could be a provision which prohibits interested directors from voting, but includes appropriate carve-outs. Like, for example, the situation where all directors are interested, so taking out insurance, or where it's quite clear that the issue is of common interest to all. In terms of any other directors having roles with other water organisations, well, the extent to which that might be relevant will very much depend on the issue that's being addressed by them as directors. So I think it's difficult to say that that will immediately preclude them from voting at all. But if they were, and if the decision made by their water organisation or your water organisation is clearly going to have some bearing on what the other director role or what the other organisation's making a decision on, then that's a clear case where they would have an interest and would be expected to not take part.
Would you be able to work out some options for us around how that could be not non-binary, but with some, you know, different ways of managing it?
So the
Yes.
direction is a yes with
Objects.
yeah.
And with a couple of options around how that could be done.
So either way, they're conditional, aren't they? So it's either yes, but,
Yes.
or no, but. So either way.
Something in the middle.
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Nikki, just on your point, coming back to yours, a company is required to maintain the register of director interests, and directors are required to disclose. But I'll also build into this request something which picks up on your request for reporting on interests, and I'll come back to you separately in relation to this point.
Thank you, that'd be great, Mike.
We would have that in the annual report anyway. Interests, related parties.
Not the interest, but it's just the management of them over time. You know.
Okay. Quentin, you've got a question.
A bit more.
Quentin, did you want to speak?
Sorry, I was actually just getting ahead of the next two ones, if that's okay, because I actually think that the two are interrelated in that, I mean, we, you know, it's hard to answer this question. And do we know the number of directors that we're aiming for? Sorry, is it
5. Yes.
5? Well, yeah, because I mean, this is where the problem comes, because 75% of 5 is a tricky number, and so is you know, a casting vote of 4, you know, whether you got 4 or 5. So I mean, I think this has got to be viewed more holistically. So I'd say that you know, if there's 5 directors, a quorum is 4, and no, the chair shouldn't have a casting vote, because then that sort of, the idea is that you've got 5 because it's a tiebreaker. So
we could write in, if we have 6, then it's this. If we have 7, then it's this, up to a point, because we're
No,
talking
I
about.
Does
So
it
that
cost?
complicated. I'm happy with 75% as a quorum. I don't believe for this kind of thing, 50% should be a quorum. And no, I don't think the chair should have a casting vote. So it doesn't matter the numbers.
well, it does matter the
75%.
numbers, because if it's 75%, then 4 out of 5 it is a quorum, but 3 isn't.
Exactly. I'm comfortable with that. I don't
Me
think
too.
that we should have 3 people deciding on these kind of
Yeah,
things. So
No, well, I agree with that, but why wouldn't you just say have 5 directors and say 4 is the minimum?
The number of directors.
because the directors might change, and then you're keeping that requirement of most of them having to be there.
Is the number of directors specified in our constitution? Because I thought that's what
I think we said a minimum of 3.
Yeah, that's right, we set up to 5.
So, but the problem, just going back to Melissa's point, the problem is if one passes away, dare I say it, then you automatically only have 4, and therefore 3 is a quorum. For that point, until you appoint another one.
Which I then think is fine.
Well, I don't agree. Don't think 3 is fine, and because I think that is too narrow. Anyway, I think the point is that, I mean, I agree that you want to avoid the need for a casting vote, but you also need a mechanism in place if you have a draw. So,
Well, you don't necessarily need a mechanism, Quentin, because if you can't agree, then you can't agree. Depends on whether you actually need to move forward or not.
well, and that might be the case, but
also, in my view, that should also be a case, if it's 2-2, that should also be a case where that board should go back and relook at it.
Yeah.
Because it's clearly.
Well, that's right, but
that's not.
But you're automatically creating a super majority requirement then, which I'm okay with as well, but that's another. You're effectively creating a super majority requirement. So
75 and no sounds good to me.
So if we had three directors, which our constitution allows for.
Yeah.
Then you have to have 3. No, well then you have to have 3.
All three.
All 3.
Because 2 is only 66.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I did that.
Yeah, so it would have to be all 3.
But I feel comfortable with that. If you've only got 3 directors, the quorum should be all of them.
Well, then that's different from 75%.
No, it's not.
Oh, so it's 100.
Because 75%, because 2 out of 3 is only 66%.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
But the other thing you got to be careful of with quorums is if you make the quorum too high, then you can potentially never have an actual meeting because not enough people turn up.
Yep.
So,
Well, that's
but
what
I
we
think,
get paid, so say.
And we're only talking about 4 meetings a year down the track.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think 75 seems, from my perspective, seems to work because that's either 3 out of 4, 3 out of 3, or 4 out of 5, which means that only 1 is ever going to be missing.
Yeah, works for me.
Yeah.
So,
Lovely,
Okay,
and
Yeah.
option 2.
thank you.
From a practicality standpoint, how hard is it to amend the constitution exposed afterwards? Because if at some point, 4 years down the road, these mature individuals, we trust them, all that sort of stuff, and they want to decide on their own, is it that hard to amend the constitution?
This is a
No.
company's office price.
we have to pass a resolution as the shareholder of the entity resolving to amend the constitution.
Yeah, I mean, what I think we are right now is, from my personal view, is we want to make this fairly restrictive. And then at some point down the road, they can amend it if they need to.
Will come to us going, it doesn't quite work for us, we need to make it a meeting.
Are they legally able to meet online?
Cool. Okay, so where did we land on the casting vote? I think we heard a no.
No.
Okay, there we go. Quick,
Lovely.
let's go, move on.
Frequency of board meetings. Monthly, no less than 10 times per annum, quarterly, or at the board's discretion. remember you also have the statement of expectations if you want additional reporting.
I struggle a bit with this because I would say in the startup phase,
Mm.
you're going to want more meetings
Yeah,
but then year 2, you might not.
so it's no.
So,
plan.
so how do we?
No.
Just at the board's discretion. You're relying on, you're appointing a set of quality directors who should be able to figure this out themselves. So my view is that
And if they
the
can't,
board's discretion.
Could you do board's discretion, but no less than, so combine a couple of those together?
Yeah, I'm sure you could do board's discretion, no less than 6
No
times.
less than quarterly.
No, less than quarterly.
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Well, doesn't that then link to our expectations on how we're going to be reported to as well? Do they need to sign off reports that come to us?
That's the SEO, isn't it?
Well, I guess the next one down is additional reporting
Yeah.
stuff. So, yeah, I'm comfortable with that, the board's discretion with the minimum of quarterly.
But that's the same as no
No.
less than quarterly.
No, but it might mean you could be sending a signal that says you're not allowed to meet more than quarterly. If
No.
it just says quarterly.
No,
it's not.
no less than
Yeah,
quarterly.
yeah.
So we're just picking a number. You've got no less than 10 times, but we're just
Oh,
making
fair.
that to no less than 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever.
Yeah. So, no less than quarterly at the board's discretion.
Right, thank you.
Well, I think we're paying them, so you want them to turn up at least quarterly. So I like the hybrid option that it's at the board's discretion, but no less than quarterly.
That's getting that flex in the first 7 year too.
Yeah.
And if it's not working, we can always change it.
Additional reporting obligations of CCO. So you can include, I think on the one of the documents I sent out, which was a citizen Grierson document, there are some options for additional reporting. Do you want to talk through that, Mike?
I don't really have too much to add beyond the decision-making table that we sent through.
Okay.
You've got the ability to put down in the constitution what you would like to receive from the board and at what frequency, or you could rely on the more statutory form of reporting, which is directed by the content in the council's statement of expectation. So it's really coming back to that question around how much oversight you want and where that direction needs to sit. I guess the one practical issue with putting reporting content into the constitution is that it might get superseded by what you decide needs to be in the statement of expectations. And because the reporting requirements in the SOE are mandatory content, you might find that that's the better place to in fact provide that direction. And it means that when you review your SOE, presumably on a 3-yearly interval, it provides the council with the opportunity to relook at that list and say, you know what, that hasn't been giving us what we need. And we think we need to, in fact, get the reporting on these issues from the board. So you've got that option as well.
Can you
the question here is really
can you remind me that?
Say
Can you
again, sorry.
remind me that just the provisions of the water services bill, are they, the statement of expectation is more binding than a normal CCO, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So a water organisation, section 226, Councillor Smith, water organisation must give effect to the statement of expectations, and there is certain mandatory content requirements for the council's SOE, and that includes the outcomes that the shareholders expect the water organisation to achieve, requirements in respect of resource management, planning and land use, a requirement that they must act in accordance with any relevant statutory obligations that applies to you as shareholder, and then the information that the water organisation must include in its water services half-yearly report. So that's the mandatory, but you can also include in your SOE other information that you would expect to be reported to on at regular intervals.
Okay, no, thank you.
It's probably, from a cost perspective, it's more efficient to have this sort of thing in the statement of expectations rather than, have to go back and alter constitutions. If you're happy to just leave it with what we've currently got, and then when we get to the statement of expectations, you can think about anything additional that you might want in the reporting space.
Alongside this, I think it would be really useful for the water CCO, sorry, for the airport, we have a guidance document, a governance guidance document. And I think we're going to need to either extend that or create a new one for this so that future councils, because there's a lot of detail, are going to understand what their role is, what they can do, what they can't do, where.
Yes, quite right, Nikki. Megan's actually already shared the airport one.
Okay, great.
Indicated that it would be good for me to do something similar.
So we're going with option 2.
Option 2.
Option 2. Thank you. Okay, so key matter number 8, audit review of the water services strategy. So option 1 is to include the audit requirement in the constitution. To include the review requirement in the constitution is option 2, or option 3 is to lay that out in the statement of expectations.
Constitution, I think, for this.
Audit or review?
Well, both. Can you set out the difference between include review requirement? I'm not.
Do you want to talk to that, Mike?
Sure. I guess the question there is the extent to which you want the formal audit of the water service strategy, or just or you want the board to obtain an independent review rather than the full formal audit, which the council's more familiar with. So those are the two options in respect of audit, or you can just direct that it happens through the statement of expectation. So we're talking about 3 options, 2 of which relate to content that you will put in the constitution to set that clear expectation of how the board initiates an audit or review. And if you did decide that a formal audit was required, you could require that they obtain the report from the Auditor General in the usual way.
So isn't there a distinction that an audit tends to take a relatively narrow financial approach, whereas a review can take a broader consequential approach to what's the impact of the strategy on the community, environment and economy? Is there a distinction there, Mike?
Well, yes, potentially. If it's an independent review of the water service strategy, I suppose you've got more scope to commission a review to cover off other issues beyond what the auditors would typically focus on.
Who would set that? Like, how would you set the scope of that? Because if we're saying it needs to be in the constitution, it's a direction to them. Could you include alongside that a direction to work with us on the scope? Would we be able to agree that?
Might it be better to have that in the statement of expectations, because it might run things. So here it's the way I interpret this is a review of the water service strategy is a review of the strategy, not how effective is it, or what are the implications of it.
Yes,
Yeah, like it's because it's clean.
So is there any reporting requirements under the legislation for the organisation to report on its delivery of the strategy?
It's on the statement of expectations. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Mike.
So the water service strategy is going to be the key document that they prepare. And the process that's been built into the legislation on this front requires the water organisation to prepare and then provide it to shareholder councils for review and comment before it's in a position to consider adopting it. So there is already that process step, but what Maz was pointing to there is in section 227 of the Act, there is the ability or potential ability to put in the statement of expectation a requirement that part or all of the water organisation's water service strategy be independently reviewed or audited. So I think if you're talking about audit is going to be focused on the financial component. The independent review could potentially be broader. And if you wanted to explain that in the statement of expectations, you could do so, or you could have a direction in the statement of expectations that the water organisation develop the scope of an independent review and obtain council's approval of that before it commissions that work. So you've got some options to consider there.
But just thinking about the backwards and forwards that's happened in the past with the airport about SOEs and SOIs, is there any opportunity to put an enabling clause in the constitution which explicitly says that the shareholder may require audit or shareholder may require review? So, you know, because that then locks our ability in, because, you know, in the past, in a more difficult governance relationship, you know, there was a lot of ping pong around the airport. So as to what councillors could ask and shouldn't ask and things. So I think having an enabling clause doesn't mean it's a requirement, but it actually explicitly flags that the shareholder may choose to.
And it means it doesn't get lost over time if it disappears out of the SOE, because it's still an option, whether it's in the SOE or in May in the Constitution, but it doesn't disappear.
So we could have it so that it was, if we request, then it is independently. I mean, because I think having it compulsorily that it's either audited or independently reviewed all the time, it just adds extra costs for the sake of nothing, potentially.
It should be like
Nevertheless, we're dealing with a startup, right? And I don't see what mitigates against an annual audit. Yes, it's a giant pain, and yes, the Constitution can be changed, but in a startup phase, what's wrong with an annual audit?
And you're talking about two different things.
Two different services strategy.
This is not a financial audit. This is the audit of the strategy.
Is there operational
But then the other piece is, right, so the audit of the strategy would not supersede, but it would provide additional information. And so is there anything that mitigates against us requiring that as well on top of financial audit, other than cost?
Well, that's where I think Mike's point comes in that the access that we would review it every it comes back each 3 years, but that's us. The cost of the review would be on us. If we require them to carry out a substantive review of the effectiveness of what they're doing, not just are they meeting the outputs, but what's the impact of that, then the cost of that sits with the Water Services Division, which I'd be more comfortable with.
Yeah, can we fund us?
They would do it possibly more efficiently.
Yes.
I don't know.
But also, what we want is independent advice to, you know, for the purposes of accountability. It might be that we want to choose the auditor, you know, the reviewer, and pay for that. So,
but isn't also,
as long as we're allowed to.
Isn't also the government reviewing that WECS as well? Okay, so doesn't CCO have to submit its updated WECS to the government entity?
I was going to show from the chief says that the economic regulation regime is designed entirely to do what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So the Water Services CCO is subject to huge amounts of oversight, monitoring, reporting, accountability, discussions with the Comcom around all of this stuff, and it's all structured off the water services strategy. And then the mandatory requirements include half-yearly reporting back to you on the water services delivery of the water services strategy as well. So there's already a very what is going to be a very intense accountability framework.
So maybe with what John's saying is that if we request, like if we're not happy at all with what's going on, then we can put it in, request it.
And I think the reason is there may be some softer issues that are regulatory frameworks that we might want to see how's the organisation relationships with manufacturing work. You know, there'll be a few things that are not Comcom sort of thing. So I think, reserving our right, I think it's probably
great. So would that then we would have the right to get
the shareholder may, you know, sort of.
We would may require them to do it.
And so are we requiring them to do it, or are we requiring that they comply with anyone that we get in to do that working review? Because they're two kind of slightly separate things.
Yeah, you can be more specific. Review undertaken by agency is directed by council or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, that would be great.
I think the only other comment I'd make on this would be we just need to be conscious of timing. So if the shareholder was to require the organisation to get the audit completed by the Auditor General, there's a requirement to give at least 12 months notice to audit to provide for that and ensure that they've got the capacity available to in fact deliver. And I think if you're going to include the Mayor's enabling provision in the Constitution, which allows the council to require IDA an audit or a review of the whole thing or parts of it, you probably just want to make sure that that notice is given 12 months before the water service strategy needs to be adopted, so that there's scope for that to happen.
Right, so that we get the review ahead of being able to comment on it or whatever we decide down the track.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
that's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Are you all
You
comfortable with
may,
that?
I mean, the way I'm sort of conceptualizing this is that you may, through the course of the first 2 years or 18 months of a particular water service strategy being up and running, have some concerns about the delivery of certain services. And that might be enough to give you, as the council, cause to commission or seek a review into how this particular thing is being undertaken by the organisation. And if that review is then able to shed some light on that, it could be built in and responded to through the next round of water service strategy or through the annual budget exercise.
It's a long lead in over multiple
It
councils.
is, but I think having worked on pulling together some of these water service strategies, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm telling you all to suck eggs. You know exactly how hard it is to pull together a long-term plan, but some of these water service strategies are quite complex pieces of work as well.
Thanks, Mike.
Lovely, thank you, Mike. I've got that on the tape. Number 13, so council's role in preparing the water services strategy and annual budget. So do we need to go public excluded for this component? I'm just mindful of the privilege advice that was shared.
Well, that advice is not actually in the workshop papers, is it? Separately, it is separate.
Yeah, it is separate. So do we, just from I need some advice from a process.
Most of the excluded workshop, we need to, we should have said there would be a couple of excluded segments, so
It is on the website as being, so the citizen prayers and advice is, there is a reason for it to be public excluded.
thank you, Jane, I didn't know that.
Okay.
So you can go into public excluded.
Well, do we want to talk about the principles first before we get down to the detailed legal advice? Because I think it'd be quite good to understand the nuances around the two different options before we nut down into why we might choose one or the other.
I thought if it's useful, I mean, noting that the legal advice is still subject to legal privilege, it may be that we can continue on in public forum here and I can just give the brief overview to then inform discussions around the table so that we don't have to go into public excluded. The advice can remain privileged, but you can continue to have the discussion in light of the quick summary that I provide.
Right. Yeah, I think if we could do that, if we can start with that overview.
Yeah. So the overview is that the Water Services Act provides an ability for the council to retain for itself a number of different roles in respect of the water service strategy. The standard or the baseline is that the council as shareholder will be given the draft or proposed water service strategy and provided an opportunity to give comments to the water organisation on the content and the approach taken, which the organisation then needs to take into account before preparing it and adopting it. Along the way, there is also the potential and high likelihood that there will be public consultation, either on the entire water service strategy or parts of it. But that will be an issue for the statement of expectations to tackle. And you as the shareholder council can direct that there will be consultation, like you have a requirement for your LTP. But coming back to the nature of the council's involvement, there's the option of the baseline, which is providing comments that the board must consider and respond to. And then there are two other options. One, which reserves for your council the ability to require amendments to the draft, and another which retains the power to approve the final water service strategy. But in both of those instances, there are some potential implications that would need to be worked through. But I think the key point I want to make is that if you do retain the power to require amendments or to approve, it will in fact be the organisation that is responsible for making the final decision to adopt it, because it's their water service strategy that they will then be charged with implementing. So that there are some practical implications and consequences which we've laid out in the advice for you, and they range from complexities with the council's decision making if it decided to retain those two powers that I spoke to. There's a related challenge around whether the council is going to be best placed to make those decisions in the absence of technical support and expert evidence or expert advice. There's the potential duplication if the council reaches the view that either of those decisions are significant and require consultation in their own right, when the water organisation will presumably be consulting in its own. And then, of course, there's a potential issue where the council, in reserving for itself these decisions, finds itself in a place of disagreement with the water organisation, which is a practical challenge that both the shareholder and the water organisation would need to manage. And try and work out through potentially some negotiated outcome or dispute process. So I thought that's probably the quick summary to try and inform the discussion that you will need to have, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so I mean, from a political point of view, option 2 seems to bring us back into the role of governors around infrastructure strategy, which was the whole reason that we were removed from being governors over a future infrastructure strategy. So it seems to be a bit counterintuitive, and I hear what you say about the potential difficulties. I mean, yeah, if we went with option 1 and we comment and give our recommendations to the board, and they choose to completely, for whatever reason, disregard them, I mean, we still have the option to seek a new board. So that's the worst case scenario. If we felt strongly about something that was not being enacted, I mean, because that board will be regulated to the eyeballs about what they can and can't do. So, so we need to listen carefully to their views. If there was something that we recommended as a council and they said, well, thanks, but no thanks, there'd be a pretty robust discussion around that. But we still have the ultimate recourse if we needed to remove directors. Not that we would ever want to be there. We'd never want to be there. But I think the option 2 puts us back into that semi-political directive. We're talking about the water services strategy, which is effectively an operational delivery plan, I guess.
In the budget. Well,
yeah.
I thought the concept of leaving it where we're at the moment with the airport, which is we have the ability to change something, but we don't agree it. I mean, it's the same scenario that we deal with the airport, and it works fine.
So that comment would be through formal resolution of council on what actually goes back, not just through a discussion.
So the option 2 is where you request amendments.
Request amendments, exactly. That's what you're talking about, because I thought you were.
no, require.
Sorry.
It's different.
Oh, request.
Yes, and that's required. So that's where we're at with QAC. That's how that works.
I think Mike's advice around that was that does start leading you into the kind of control.
Deemed directors.
But with option 2, if the council requests an amendment that the Act says, well, no, the council's trumped anyway. So
Yes, well, you can't, the entity can't do anything unlawful.
no. So if we decide we want a more expensive option, for example, and ComCom says, well, no, you can't. The organisation, the water CCO, would have to abide by the Act.
Yes, but just by having that in the Constitution means that you've got to enter that whole cycle and that whole process. That would mean that you have the ability to say, we want you to put that in there.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't have,
Yes.
if you are going for, you will review it and provide feedback, you don't traverse that.
So it's sort of the organisation, if I was sitting there in the organisation, what do I do here? The Act probably trumps the council in that case. So you'd have to work against your shareholder.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
But what that also does is option 2 forces that negotiation to happen.
Council's not going to agree to something that it's not allowed by law.
No, well,
we have
yeah.
that advice, wouldn't we?
So what I'm sort of saying is, it sort of forces that negotiation to happen. So
I'm not
this,
sure if it's negotiation, Matt.
okay, well, the conflict is always a silly
Yeah,
versus a conflict where there's a stalemate, in which case they'll go to the council.
yes, so you'd be asking your board of directors to do something that didn't, which may not align with the intent of the ComCom regulations or the intent of the legislation.
And it's always black, it's not black and white, it's always grey.
Yeah.
It's never, no, it's always a grey area.
Yeah, particularly around the issues of what's best value for money or cost effective. But it could be, well, we've got a definition, our definition of that is different from one that you're currently applying. We suggest that this option is, and it's kind of like what we've been dealing with recently, that there's maybe weaving somewhere in between is appropriate. So that sort of feedback, is that power in option one sufficient for us to be able to influence sufficiently? I hear what you're saying, John, that we don't want to be in the position where we're taking over those decision making, but option two provides us with more ability, almost a reserve power to say, well, yeah, but we think you need to go that way, and give them more of a nudge.
It is a big thing to get across the line in a council road, I can tell you, over the last 6 years, to direct a CCO to do something. I don't think we've done it once, but it does force some discussions to happen. And I think it's important. I think this is, the control that we're giving up here is not ours. It belongs to the community, and we need to think very carefully before we just hand it all over. Let's not be scared of something that requires us to engage with our CCO and work through things. We're not a bunch of stupid people. If something's not going to be possible, we're not going to, it will not get across the line if it's unreasonable. That's my experience over the last 66
years. Given that we can almost.
But we otherwise we're just saying, sorry, but we've decided at this point, right at the start, before we even know these people and know how they operate, before we even know that it can work with new legislation and a whole new system, we're saying we don't want the power to say, really, you need to do this.
And what that system's going to look like and what judicial decisions might come out in the future.
Just one more question. So, and with help for advice on this. So the statement of expectation, we can put stuff in the statement of expectation about the strategy and budget. Is the organisation required to give effect to the statement of expectation?
Yes.
Yes.
That's where you give direction to the CCO. So the water services strategy has to give effect to the statement of expectations. The statement of expectations is where you give direction to the CCO about what you want to do.
But you can't.
So option two almost is a default, isn't it then? We almost have to be able to do so.
All right, so
ComCom confirms that the water services strategy delivers on your statement of expectations. It's one of the regulatory things that the ComCom regulates. So when they review the water services strategy, one of the things the water services strategy has to do is to show how it's going to deliver on the statement of expectations.
And are we constrained as to what we can and can't put in a statement of expectations?
By the law.
Yeah, so what's in scope, what's out of scope?
There is no limitation. So there is no limitation on the content that's able to be included in an SOA other than where that content is inconsistent with the legislation or any regulation that the water organisation must comply with. That will always trump an expectation set by shareholders.
Unless.
Well,
so are there any carve-outs?
This is different. Water is different from any board.
No.
Different legislation.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna call it. So on this discussion, section 228 says the statement of expectations must not include any requirements or expectations that relate to the water organisation's performance or exercise of a duty, function or power under this act, or require the water organisation to perform or not perform a specified act or to achieve a specified result in relation to a person or persons. However, that section doesn't apply if the water organisation's foundation documents provide otherwise.
Right. So
why hasn't this come to us as a concern? Because this matters. What we put in the Constitution affects what we can put in the SOP. So by not including something in the Constitution, I'm not into the detail of what could be in there or couldn't be in there, but this is a really important section of the Act that hasn't been flagged up so far?
I don't think anyone's claimed that the Constitution isn't wildly important and foundational.
No, so what we're saying is that specifically that if we don't put certain things into the Constitution, we can't put them in the SOE. And it's a case of what those might be. And
is that your interpretation, Mike? Is that correct?
Section
look,
2,
yes.
3 and 4.
No, look, Nikki's right there. So in terms of the council wanting to preserve an ability to direct something to happen, yes, it can put that in the Constitution. And if that's the case, then you effectively supersede 2283. But the question is, what are these specified acts or specified results that you are wanting to include right now? I think if the council was to draw on an example, it could choose to amend its constitution to provide for that specific direction at a later date, and that would be by resolution of the council to include that direction in the constitution, which the organisation would then be required to comply with, unless, and this is if you go across the page to 229, there is any inconsistency with the direction or requirement imposed by a regulator, where the regulator's direction will prevail.
Okay. I guess the point is that we haven't been, this link hasn't been flagged up, this link between the Constitution and the SOE. And it's critical because we're having a discussion about the Constitution and what doesn't need to go in it. But in fact, if we do want certain things to be in the SOE, we need to put certain things in the Constitution, or we can't put them in the SOE. And we don't know what they are, and you can ask us, well, what might those be? But what we want is advice from you around what limitations we might be, when we come to do the SOE, what limitations might be in place, because we didn't put something in the Constitution. So it would be helpful to get some advice around, if you want these things to be in the Constitution, they would also need to be if you want these things to be, if you want control of these things by the SOE, you would also need to put them in the Constitution. If you want control of these things by the SOE, you don't need to put them in the Constitution. It's sort of have a table so we can actually see. Because at the moment, we're not the experts. We need some help.
I think the challenge there is that we need the Constitution for the SOE. So we haven't got the window to do all of the SOE work first to line them up. So the approach is, let's get the Constitution so we can incorporate, do the SOE. If things come out of that where it is, oh, well, hang on, you want to do that, but it's not reflected in the Constitution, then we will have to go back and update the Constitution. If we don't do it that way, we won't be live.
Sure. Why don't we then, can we potentially have an option 3 then that gets the best of both worlds, where it says that council has the ability to comment on and, where necessary, require amendments to the water services water services strategy and annual budget, with the final approval sitting with the board. That meets all of the legal requirements and gives us room to come up with something in the SOE. But as Nikki said, if we don't do that, we've missed it. But particularly at the outset.
At the outset, when it's really important. And I would have thought this would have kind of been worked up for us, because the integration is really clear that it's important. So I would have liked to have thought that it would have come to us at this point. I know everyone's in a rush, and that can be a problem. But I think also when we agree the Constitution, I'd like to see, as part of the resolution, a direction to come back and review the Constitution as a part of that SOE, so that it is already a direction to bring it back. So it might be within a couple of months.
The problem, we're not agreeing the Constitution at this meeting.
No, I realise that.
So my question is that taking into account the item that Nikki has raised, is there potential for the smart minds around the room to do a little bit of offline work and say actually what might be a placeholder in the Constitution that alludes to some of the issues that we might, because otherwise we're just going to try and make it up around the table, which never would be good. But I think it would be good to come back with some reflection on that sort of dilemma. If we don't put it in the Constitution, then we can't consider it an SOE, and then we'll be told we've got to change the Constitution, which takes another 12 months. So
the question is,
sorry, great question.
I was just going to say, I mean, the question is at what level are we talking about here? Because clearly we can't put everything in the Constitution, because but what we can, once again, our roles governance, and so if we can specify that there are strategies and policies of council that would that they must adhere to, that may give us scope to that might give you enough scope to then control them further down the track. And I think that's the policies, that's the bit that we probably haven't talked about, is how do we ensure that our policy influences the CCTO or the CCO. Now, there are provisions, in the SOI but you might be able to build something into the Constitution that says that they must adhere to certain policies or certain range of policies that are relevant to CCOs. And obviously the funding and financing policy, the climate and biodiversity strategy and things like that, they can influence outwards to the CCOs, and they do. So it's just a matter of trying to influence those things in that way.
Yeah, Stephen.
So could we not just have a clause in the Constitution that says council's role in preparing the water services strategy and annual budget will be as set out in the statement of expectations?
Can I
Then the
just
statement of
clarify?
expectations.
And then maybe, as I
So
said,
then it's in the
maybe
Constitution.
upwardly and any strategies, any relevant strategies or policies of council.
Can I just get Mike to clarify? Section 228 that Nikki raised does not enable, through the Constitution or the Statement of Expectations, for any direction to be given to the CCO that would be inconsistent with any other requirement of the Local Government Water Services Act or the economic regulation. So Section 228, confirm me if I'm correct, Mike, I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. You can't, through the Constitution or the SOE, direct the CCO to do something that's inconsistent with.
That's correct. So the objectives in the Act and the financial principles and the other specific requirements that the Act places on water service providers will still need to be complied with. What 228 is contemplating is that there might be other express requirements that a council wants a water organisation to deliver that might be deserving of being referenced in a constitution. But I think there's two different places for it, right? So you do have the ability to include it in the SOE, which, as Councillor Smith's question earlier, that's quite a directive document now. It has to be given effect to. But I'm just mulling over this conversation, and I think where we seem to be landing is that the council's got appetite to retain its ability to require amendments, but I think before that power is exercised, we could perhaps look at some wording which requires engagement with the board as to the issue identified that might require that power to be exercised, so that there is a direct conversation first before the council might need to consider relying on that power. And that would be bringing it into line with Clause 6 and Schedule 9 of the Local Government Act, where there is the power for the shareholder to resolve that the statement of intent is modified. And so I'm interested in whether or not that type of approach could be a softer entry into that power, which might mean that there is an ability to broker an agreement without needing the council to go through a formal decision-making exercise. I just park the conversation.
I think that sounds like a pragmatic way forward. I am still mindful of, this organisation, the CCO is an extension of council, and we've got a whole bunch of policies about what we do, how we behave, how we, sort of interact with our community, which has nothing to do with the water regulator or the services. So we would still want that organisation at a holistic level to behave a little bit like some of the stuff that we're doing. So I think the comment that Quentin made about, operating in alignment with, I guess, our values or our strategic direction, because the one thing we're doing one sort of strategic direction or spatial planning or whatever, an organisation doing the other, not talking about how much they should spend on pipes or what the rate should be or what their investment priorities should be. That's for them. But I think it'd be good at a foundation level have that sort of nod somewhere to the fact that there are organisations, and then we'd expect them to align with that.
I do quite like Quentin's point about finding the right altitude with this. I guess I think the point I would urge with regards to this in the SO, we've got a bit of comfort with iteration here. We'll need to go away and do a bit of thinking about how this actually plays out and what this means implication wise. I'd also just caution, as Nikki said, this is a terribly sensible and reasonable group of people. You're writing this for people that will come in trienniums into the future as well. So there is also an element of protection here. So you're setting it up to align with the council, which I think is where John and Quentin have come from as well. Just keep in the back of your mind as well, you're also making sure that this is going to be successful no matter what happens around the elected table in future.
And that's the point of retaining some control in some ways. I've got one.
Can I ask a question? You and I had just a chat about this off the table. When in option 2 it says the council and/or final approval for the strategy and budget, surely legally we can't do that. It has to be the board that approves its strategy and budget. So that's gone out of scope, isn't it?
No. This is what I've clarified in the legal advice, is that yes, there's ability to require amendments and/or exercise a right of approval, but the board is the one that is required to adopt the final strategy as its own.
Okay.
I think if we want to continue along this path, we should go into PX.
Yep.
Do we need to?
Can I ask another question before we go into PX on a different topic? There's something I'd like to be included in the Constitution because it could be enacted very quickly and get away from us. The legislation allows for the water CCO to enter 50-year contracts. So it could effectively farm out any of it could asset management, budgets, it could farm out the whole thing essentially to a contractor. And it may take a lesser approach. It might be 30 years to a specific area or whatever. But I guess what I want to do is look at the length of contracts that we've been using. And I want us to consider how we limit the length of the contract. Because once that CCO board enters into a contract, and it could happen really quickly, we could set up the board. We might have done our statement of expectations, but not be able to put this requirement not to enter, because that wouldn't be in the statement of expectations. This would require, I think, the use of 2284. We couldn't put it in the SOE unless it was in the Constitution, I think. But I'll take Mike's advice on that. But I think we have to limit the length of the contract. 50-year contract is effectively privatisation. It doesn't drive accountability. There's all sorts of problems with it. I don't know what the right length is to put in at this point, but I know when the last government did the Three Waters legislation, they started with 30. I pushed back on that and had some discussions with Select Committee, and they did reduce it down to 15. That was the longest that piece of legislation was going to allow for.
I'll just make a note on that one.
Oh, this is the thing, is I've already talked about.
Just want to finish this one out.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, we'll come back to that.
can I make a comment on this one?
Do you want me to comment
so-
on the? Sorry, I'll be quiet for a minute. We'll come back
No,
to that.
it's fine, Mike. I just thought, well, before we go into PX, I just wanted to raise this because I think it's important. And if we can deal with it while we're not in PX, that's great. If we have to go into PX, that's
Well, we'll
fine.
come back out PX or after we've discussed this.
No, I'm happy to comment on this point, Nikki. As you've pointed out, the legislation has been amended to allow for contracts of no longer than 50 years as opposed to the 30 years in the LGA. So that was a deliberate change made by the government when they enacted this legislation. But as I guess a counterpoint to the length of contract, and in fact, when talking about contract delivery more generally, they have also included some new provisions which relate to significant contracts. Now, what is significant or not will be determined by the water organisation's significance and engagement policy. And where a contract is deemed or considered to be significant, there is consultation requirements built around that, plus also a requirement for the water organisation to engage with the shareholder and obtain its approval before it enters into this type of significant contract. And so there's a couple of safeguards in the legislation already which the council can look to rely on. One option might be to say, when the organisation's developing its significance and engagement policy, that anything over 30 years will be considered significant, which means the council has that specific approval role before that contract can be entered into.
So can I ask a question, Mike? If they went ahead and entered that contract, not having consulted, would the contract be ultra-vires and undone, or under the Companies Act would it need to continue despite the error?
Well, that would be a process failure in terms of their requirements
Would be,
under the
but
legislation. We haven't looked at whether it would be, void or ultra vires. That's something we haven't been asked to look at yet, Nikki. So I'd have to come back to you on that question.
Yeah, I'm just maintaining my position on this. 50 years is way too long, and I don't want to rely on consultation provisions. It ultimately will be their decision unless we put something in the Constitution that says we have veto rights before they sign a contract. But again, if they've already signed a contract, they've already signed a contract.
Okay, I'll take that. And
But I've already had this conversation with
I'll give me formal direction in the next session, if that's okay. Can I just make a comment about this, the water services strategy, something for you to consider from the board's perspective? So if you were directors of this entity and you're the one with all the liabilities, how would you feel about your shareholder approving the strategy or insisting on amendments? You don't have to answer that, but that is a different lens, right? Because especially we're just going through the process of trying to recruit a stellar board, and these sorts of things will probably be going through their mind.
Quentin has got a comment. Quentin, did you want to say something?
Sorry, I take the point that they need enough leash to make the responsibilities that they have, but I was going to make the point that by the time the airport had sold its shares back in whenever, it was too late to undo that, and there will be cases, as Nikki was sort of pointing out, once a contract is executed, it's very hard to go back on that. Now, obviously, in the case with the Wanaka Airport lease, there was that was slightly different because it was the decision of council, and it was found to be not follow process, and the court quashed that. So, it's a fine line, but we need to ensure there's some level of protection against decisions we don't want made, but without constraining the board members unnecessarily.
I think we need to go exclusively to talk about that.
Would you be happy for that to be in the next workshop, which is Constitution Part 2 or Part 3 actually? So I can bring that back, and that will give me an opportunity to have a chat with Mike around, what might be some other consideration.
I think the discussion is about what is significant, and I think that's that's I think sensibly and correctly been raised, but it's not something that's probably been on all of our radars, to use the airport analogy. And I think that is really good. So there will be some things that I guess would like veto or approval or discussion on. So how do we do that? But it'll be more than one particular area. So if that will come back to us as part of this constitutional, I think that would be really helpful at this point.
Then can I just clarify, I've got this right. So the current position around the water services strategy is we've come up with some words around council will have the opportunity to request amendments to the final, will request amendments as it feels appropriate or will see necessary with the final approval sitting with the board.
That's the point that Mike said there's advice on. So we have the ability to provide comment anyway. The only question is whether we establish in the Constitution, because otherwise we might not have it, to be able to require amendments. And the question of where final approval sits is doesn't really sit there. But because if we require them to make an amendment, whoever makes the final decision, us or them, the amendments have to be made.
Yeah, and it gives some more strength to our SOE, because if the thing is that they have to implement or give effect to the SOE, but we think the strategy doesn't actually give effect to the SOE on a certain point, then we can make that point, and maybe that's maybe we can limit the changes that we make. I don't know, but if they have to give effect, we have control through the SOE, do we or don't we? So what what problem is this additional level of control?
Makes us deemed directors.
And if it needed to
If we've
be,
got the ability, that's the advice we're getting here, is that if
Yeah.
we've got the ability to require amendments,
Yeah.
it makes us deemed directors of the CCO. And I absolutely don't want to
yeah,
borrow
I know
that.
what you mean, because we don't
Yeah,
have enough.
So,
control
and
to
I think, well, I think we all agree that the organisation
SOE.
that is being established, it carries out the statutory responsibility. Yeah, because that's, otherwise we're going to be in messy territory. And I think the discussion is about that level of direction and control. And I think option B tries to address the level of direction and control we might want, but actually takes us into difficult legal territory. So the challenge is how do we come up
Yeah.
with something that is cognizant of the fact that we will volunteer, and we've got the SOE, and there's a requirement to give to implement that. But I think having a constitution that expects that we will give direction, and that's explicit in the constitution that we will give direction, be that on an ad hoc basis or through the SOE. But ultimately, it's the board's responsibility. And we still have the recourse if we're unhappy with the board that we can change that. It would have, and a lot of this, when the relationship's good, a lot of this doesn't matter, right? It's like your employment contract. Most of the time you don't need it, or standing orders. It's when things are not working that then everyone runs to the small print. So what is our ultimate control? The ultimate control is we employ the board. Yeah, that's our ultimate control.
So therefore it goes back to what you've suggested then, because we can comment and then we can suggest or request amendments. And again, the final approval is not relevant in that sense, is it? So if we need to, I think let's come back to the next meeting then, a bit more clarity around.
Yeah. I think you know what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think we do.
I think we're very cognizant of the legal advice that we've had, and I don't think we need to traverse that. I think we've all been able to read that. We can understand where it's at. And I think it'd be good to come up with an option that allows us to try and achieve what we're hoping we can achieve, but without going into that accountability and territory.
Yeah, and some of the stuff can go to process and contracts, and I don't think that puts us in jeopardy. We're not going to end up, in trouble as a deemed director because we've put some control around the length of contracts or other process matters or things that.
You've given me very good direction. We've dealt with a number of matters and a few to come back, which we will do in the next couple of weeks. So there, as you can see, and some of this might have to move out actually, but there are a number of additional meetings, and the board will be up to, and then we will be having some combined discussions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, councillors, for making the time for it.
And the online team.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
So
See you next time.
that's right.
Are we going to?
Anyone that would like to stay for
Yeah.
a Q&A session around rating.
Yeah.
Sorry, just for clarity, are we still on board for this question and answer?
us and for Catherine, to be fair, is that wasn't actually that methodology wasn't, you know,
Can you guys hear me at all?